Give folks a couple more minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, last time we had a reverb problem. I'm hoping we don't have this time. So I'm going to mute my machine and the presenter, once you get that makes a difference.
Is it the card that has, yeah, I heard that. What's the apology that? I heard that that card, it kind of sucks because once the battery runs out, you have to throw it out. There was something else about it. I thought initially I thought it was really cool. So, it's hot. Really? What does it tell you about when it comes out and buy it? How about crap? Do you have to charge it? Can you school that to charge it?
There's a lot of them. You can tell them. It wasn't too bad. I mean, it was hot, but I mean,
How'd you get
pretty much
to
800 feet.
Yeah. So, you got the it was on that. No, it was the long time ago.
Yeah, we've got a couple of them. I'm going to do one for you.
That was that India car you were talking about then.
Yeah, it's in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Next one is
That's another rule.
the thing with that though is like I was reading if you
It's a workshop.
pay now,
Here you can see what you can do.
you may have to pay more later too.
There you
go.
Next week will be a workshop.
Well, you have
They're
to pay
shaped
more
like
because the price might go up by a little bit. So
September 9th.
basically, what I was reading was saying.
I'm
that,
afraid he's going to think I'm avoiding him because I'm going to be in trouble.
You know, once they're finally ready to put it out there.
Rivals.
Well, Dan.
Yeah, I noticed he went out of his way to say that he wasn't coming to this one, which is funny because he's in London.
He is.
And then that
He's all over the place.
Yeah, he's based out of.
So let's say you go 500 and you say all in. Basis out like 500.
I thought it was London.
It's not him.
No, it's not.
But
If I say 41, something goes
always stays
keep that money.
like the reason why he's coming up early is
So they will pay him money back.
Boston.
But here's the thing. You're getting this.
And he's just going to swing down here to.
Well, I asked him a while ago. I said, "When are you coming out?"
So
And
the
they just
ultimate
messed up.
is
The night. So
$1,000
back
all
to
in.
my stuff. He said.
Okay.
One of the classes.
They give you five.
First,
So I
potential
decided
ones,
to do the one with yours. Now I have to write at least 15,000 the first time.
Worst is the I don't want to look like
I don't think there's a lot of people that go $1,000.
You do a lot of customer facing.
I have a good chance of becoming first ones.
Still the engineer.
Yeah. Then they just push it back.
I want
the release date.
They pushed it back, I think, in April or May.
So it was going to, was going to start, I think, third quarter of this year or fourth quarter. Now they're going to do the first
Alrighty.
next year.
I think we're going to go ahead and start it up. This is the DC JBoss user group, DC JBug meeting, and tonight's meetup subject is on fantasy football, a system implemented on JBoss, BRMS, and BPM. And you want to switch?
I just want to say, so we're going to do this one tonight. In 2 weeks in September, we're going to have a workshop on BRMS. So tonight you can see what you can build, and next 2 weeks you can go out there and get to play it yourself and build it. So Eric Shable's going to be in town. He's got a couple of example labs, workshop things we can build. So come to it and bring your laptop so you can play alone. And then October, I think we're slated to do a cloud-based talk. Can't remember which day, but third weekend. Yeah, something like that. We'll have that on the calendar soon. And in November, we have a JBoss Operations Network and performance management one. So after that, I'm just going to turn it over to Cam.
All right. So welcome. Thank you for coming out. What I'm going to talk about is a demonstration of the JBoss Business Rules Management System and the Business Process Management Suite to put together a fantasy football league. So a little about myself. I'm a solution architect here who works here at Missouri. I'm a practice lead specifically for rules processes and our mobile stuff. I'm also an NFL franchise owner. I own stock in Green Bay Packers. So I'm one of 500,000 owners of the Green Bay Packers.
Sorry to hear that. I didn't know they did that. I thought owners owned the whole thing.
It is actually the last. It's a nonprofit, and they sell stock.
Wow.
Yeah, they're an awesome team. And Missouri is who I work for. We're an advanced partner of Red Hat, so we do a lot of work with them, and we are curators of the JBoss Users Group, and we're a division of AEM Corporation. All right.
They have an NFL team too?
They do not. They do not. They're working on it. This project is, as I said, this is an example of using a rules management system to put together a fantasy football application. And so before we get into the kind of nuts and bolts of it, I kind of wanted to go over a business rules management system, a business process management suite. And before we do that, kind of like drill down a little bit into what rules and processes are. So from a software's perspective, these are declarative ways of talking about logic and processes. As anything that is declarative, we describe like what we want instead of not how we want to do it. And it kind of forces us to decompose problems in a logical way, and lets us tackle really large problems without getting too overly complicated. So like a SQL language is a very common example of a declarative language where you project, you tell it what you want, and then the system goes out and gets it. And so in a similar manner, the rules systems and process systems typically have a high-level DSL as well. So the rule system has its own language. It's a very high-level language. It's basically says when something, then something, when something, then something. And it's this collection of disconnected facts put together. The engine is very good at putting them together and cranking through and solving large problems. Similarly, a business process management, JBPM, uses the BPMN to XML notation, which is another very high-level way of describing a process. It's also a standard way. There's other tools that use this, you can use other authoring tools and import it into the process management suite. So this is unfortunately Chris Britz isn't here. I made this rule for him, but this is what a rules rule kind of looks like. So as I said, it's got a very high level kind of nomenclature where it just says when. You know, it's almost human readable. You know, you can kind of say I have a team that has these kind of values. I haven't paid my dues. I said this for Chris Britz runs our fantasy league, and I never paid the dues. So I put this violation that says, hey, man, pay your dues. So that's kind of what these things at a technical level looks like. And so the developers are all good here. You know, we like that. You know, that makes sense. But this creates a very large gap, right? So there are a lot of times developers will use these kind of constructs directly, but you still kind of have that big gap, and your most important rules and processes are kind of going through a telephone game where developers are implementing these things, and it's just kind of buried. Like once we gather those requirements and we just kind of throw it into a mountain of code, it kind of disappears. So we're relying on these guys, these people. So a business process platform will kind of bridge that gap, and it will put all of your most important knowledge, being your rules and processes, in one place, where everyone can take a look at it, and you have graphical representation of a process, not only at design time but also at runtime, so you can kind of see things as they go in flight. There's web-based authoring tools, so you don't have to write code to make changes to the system. And out of the box, we expect it to have some sort of way of this runtime governance. And that's kind of exactly what the JBoss projects and the corresponding Red Hat products, supportable products, do. We have the Drools Workbench and the Red Hat BRMS. This is a tool that allows you to author, test, and visually inspect all of your rules and complex event processing. We have the JBPM and Red Hat BPM suite, which is a superset of the Drools Workbench. It has all of the rules stuff, but then on top of that, it has all the processes. That again allows you to put together pictures of a process and then test it, and actually has an engine that will let you run these at runtime and create custom dashboards so you can kind of make little pie charts about how things are running through the system. And there's also something cool called the JBoss OptiPlanner, which is productized as a Red Hat Business Resource Planner. And this is kind of a separate little project, but it's a planning engine that allows you to do kind of like scheduling problems, gaming theory, that kind of thing. If you have like a lot of soft constraints, hard constraints, like route optimization or scheduling or those kind of things. It does that. So these kind of tools are really great for when you have really complex knowledge, and it has to be adaptable to change, and the analysts really have to be a part of making sure that things are right and making sure that things are running well. You want your transparent logic, and a lot of times it's not so well suited for very small problems. I mean, there is obviously an inherent learning curve, and there's an inherent kind of technology, an additional complexity to your architecture when you use these things. But in a very large problem, it can pay off for itself for many times. What I kind of like about it is that both of these kind of ways of approaching a problem forces you to kind of decompose it into in a very logical way. And as I said, so it kind of brings that really important logic out of the code. Like I've had a couple customers where we've moved a calculator out of some that was buried in if-then-else statements and buried in a bunch of code. And the very first time that I presented it to everybody in the BRMS and say, here's the rules, and it just erupted. It was almost like a huge backpack war, because people were like, that's not what it's supposed to do. And I'm like, well, that's what it was doing, but it was that first time that there was that kind of visibility, and people were, I guess they were happy that happened. I don't know. But hey, we're getting Jim Harbaugh upset here. Wasn't this supposed to be about football? So that's where it'll fit. Why did we do fantasy football? Because it gives us a chance to play with all of these toys. There's lots of really good demonstrations using BRMS, and they are all like loan calculations and bank loans and that sort of thing, or mortgage rate calculators. So I wanted to put together a demo that was kind of fun, but then it also gives a chance to actually play with all the toys. So like does everybody here play fantasy football? You guys, no? You guys?
I play with BRMS now.
You play with BRMS? All right. Well, then, yeah, then you're good. Well, I also wanted to be, get a domain that people are kind of familiar with, and so with the fantasy football, like we have rules that we can take a look at just the league. We can do static validation rules that are, to be honest with you, not necessarily sport specific. We could just make a generic sport engine out of it, looking at validation rules like. Do I have the right player in the right slot, or do I have too many teams? Do I have the same players on multiple teams? Those sort of things. I could use another rule set to actually calculate scores as they're coming in, and this one I would envision being more of a real-time system. So, plays are actually trickling in from some live feed, and it's kind of crunching through the numbers, and it's doing the calculation. What was kind of interesting there is, and we'll definitely go and look at some of these, but a lot of the scoring system, a lot of the scores that you want are accumulation scores, like points allowed, whereas you may have like single play is over 50 yards. So that kind of creates a lot of different ways that we have to do those problems. We can also use the BPM to orchestrate player trades. You can have if I want to trade, a lot of times there's like a waiting period where people can protest, and then the commissioner can come in and approve it and deny it right away, and so you have like a little business process.
Show us
BPM stuff is not done. The BPM stuff is not done, and I will definitely all of the code. This will actually be turned into a series of blog articles, and all of the code will be released on GitHub. So it'll probably be another couple weeks before all of that stuff is there. Tonight we have the score calculator and the league validation rules, but we're definitely going to keep adding on to this. And so what we will eventually be able to do is have a business process management, a business process that orchestrates the trade. You want to go around, take turns. Some people are there, some people aren't. You want to do those kind of things. And I also thought it would be, eventually we would like to use the planning engine to kind of do what's my optimum, if you're going to auto pick for me, what's the best thing to pick, because I don't necessarily want the highest ranked player or the player that's going to generate the most points, because then I might end up with 10 running backs or that sort of thing. So there's actually it's kind of a constraint problem. So to optimize a team. So that's what we're eventually. Yes, we're talking about football. He's happy again. So let's take a look at the design. Oh, that's right. So the design of this is. Let's get this other screen up. So the overall design of this is, so let's see, where can I get the domain is, the way I broke down the domain. It's not easy to move around here. If I could just do this. Okay, so dropping down into the code, what I started with was a domain breaking these things down. So obviously, if I'm storing all of these types of things inside of a database, I'm going to have a different relational model than kind of how I want to tackle this as a set of rules. And so what I wanted to do was model all of the things in a fantasy football league and kind of flatten it out a little bit. So to wit, what we have is a series of like what's interesting to us. So from a validation standpoint, we have a league, we have the idea of a roster. The roster template is kind of saying this is what your weekly lineup can look like. So your weekly lineup can have a player, a type of what type of position, and that sort of thing. And then I actually broke that out so that these are kind of floating by themselves. And then I'm going to have a team roster, one for each week. You're going to set this list of players, and they're tied to your team. The scoring system is going to take a play statistic. Is going to come in from like the NFL feed, and it's going to break it down. We're going to drop that into the rule engine. And then that's going to roll up stats, and then it's going to roll up scores. And we'll see that in just 1 second.
Was this spring hibernate or something?
Spring.
What is the annotation thing? That looks like spring.
Oh, so I do have, so this is actually the domain. So what I've created is a very small project that has just domain. These are all POJOs. That's all of these things are. Our POJOs, so I'm going to build that. I'm going to put that into the rule system, right? On the side, I have a web app that actually does go into a database, and it's using Hibernate entities, but I'm going to pull them out of the database and turn them into these POJOs that we're going to throw into the rule system.
So those are all the domain models that are all in very special format that the engine is going to be able to process.
Well, they're not actually. I mean, they're just the POJOs, in just that they're they just have. I'm sorry for they just have properties, and then they have getters and setters, and that's all they are. And yeah.
They will be consumed by the engine, the BRMS engine.
Yep.
And look for certain values. Okay.
Yep. And so what's much more interesting is to kind of go through the rules themselves. So let's take a look at this. I've set this up into 2 different rules packages. I have one for validation, and that's going to fantasy rules, and then I have one for score calculations. So for the validation rules, let's just kind of look through what we have here. So for the guided rules, for instance, I have a empty slot notification. So let's break down what this particular one is. So I'm creating a league, and I'm tying that to a particular. I'm concerned about what the current week is, and so I'm tying into that. And then I get a team roster. So a team roster is just 1 slot, and it's just saying, so the current week is 2. You're part of this league. This roster position is for the week 2, and you have a null player. So it's going to insert like an information and say, hey, you have an empty slot, and it's an inactive position, and we're about to play, right? And then I had some fun with it and put some a little more complicated rules. So this rule basically says, so for a particular week, you have, say, a quarterback, as you have ranking data that's been put in here, and you have a a higher ranked player on your bench than you do that's actually playing. So that's what this kind of does. It kind of like matches on, here's a slot that you have, there's another player, it ranks on that player ranking data, and then here's this other position that is a bench slot, ranks with his matching, his ranking data, and it shows you that it creates just like an information, because obviously that's not a warning or what have you. It's just kind of a informational, like you may be making a mistake here. Some of these other ones are much more about validation, about like it creates an error when you have a. The idea here was that maybe you imported all of your roster data from some other system, and it put a player that's a quarterback into a wide receiver slot. So yeah, these validation type rules. Some of these are just kind of we just kind of made these up, but I mean they make sense as far as.
It's not a handbook of
fantasy football.
fantasy football rules.
Well, I mean, some of the stuff. I mean, you definitely have, different leagues are definitely different. There's some kind of overarching rules, like if they basically say slot 1 is a quarterback, so you can only put a quarterback into slot 1. Slot 2 is it is a little more complicated. Some of the slots can have multiple different positions. So what I did, I put that into a list. So let's see, and then what's nice about this is, so this isn't exactly you can tell when on the higher ranked player that can get kind of unwieldy, and we'll take a look at a better way of kind of showing that level of logic. Let's say we have this higher rank notification. So what's nice about this is that this is like an analyst could cobble this together if they wanted to, right? We can always drop down and look at the source. So at the end of the day, you're going to click all of these buttons, and at the end of the day, it's going to compile it down to the Drools language, or it's going to compile it down to JBPM. And it actually, this new system of BRMS uses Maven behind the scenes, and so it's actually just going to package it up, put it into a jar file, and install it into your Maven repository. You can set that up to be your local Maven repo, home.m2 repo, or you can actually have it push up to Artifactory or what have you. So what's interesting also is if you crack open that jar file that it creates, it just has a bunch of text files in it. So it actually just has these DRL, and then for all of the different rule types, then they have a different extension. But they're just text files, and so they're actually compiled when you create a knowledge session. It's actually just compiled on the fly.
Yeah,
So
it's actually pretty nice.
yeah, so that
structure.
Yeah, it definitely does, and but as I said, it can get a little cumbersome, especially if you notice I'm doing a lot of repetitive things here. For instance, I'm creating a violation, and I've got to click new violation. There's a lot. You wear your mouse out on this this project, on this kind of thing. But there's something called a DSL, and I will definitely look into this more in the scoring section. But a DSL is we can make a lot of shortcuts. We can say, this is pretty hard to read, but there's basically two different types of sections, like when then, which obviously match what a rule looks like. And we can put a bunch of nice text, and anything inside a curly brace is basically going to be a user input. We can actually put hints on what type of input that should be, whether it be letters or numbers. And then in the equals section, we can put rules code. So let me show you what this looks like to the analyst. So when the analyst goes in and creates a guided rule, they create a special one saying that they want to use DSL. But for instance, that DSL that I was just saying, that we were just looking at, turns into this in the rule editor. So it drops down. It creates these boxes for them to just to fill in the blank. So this particular rule demonstrates, if we want a league, we want there to be at least two teams and no more than 12 teams.
So if you look at the source tab.
So if you look at the source tab, yeah, absolutely. So it's actually taking the sections from the DSL that we wrote and dropping them in here. So that's pretty handy. Another kind of shortcut that we've done is using something called an enumeration. So in an enumeration, you can set down for a particular bean, which is a fact, in a particular field. You can say this is the list of things that I want to choose from. So you can hard code them here, or what I've done is actually I have a lookup helper that actually returns an array list of strings, and it will populate them. So whenever we get into a guided rule and we say violation.severity string, it's going to create a little drop down. It keeps things nice and neat. So the other thing that is nice about BRMS is that we can also create these test scenarios. So these test scenarios allow you to very quickly, again, the analyst can do this kind of stuff, but insert some facts and then tell it what you want to come out the other side, right? So if I say in this particular, so what are we testing here? An empty slot's not very exciting. Let's look at something else. Let's look at multiple player assignment. So this is the rule that we were talking about. You know, if you're in a league, most leagues say that you can't have the same player on multiple teams, and so we really quickly put this scenario together, saying here's a team roster. We're both in the same league. We both have the same player, and it's the same week. I mean, we had to put week in there because you might trade, and then if, you know, week 1 and 2, that might be okay. And then what we're expecting is it's going to grab that and insert a violation for both teams, saying this, you know, you have a duplicate player and you have a duplicate player. So we can put that in there, and we can run that, and we get this little success message. Hopefully, if anybody has used BRMS in the past, the version 5 actually had, you could run through all of them and it would put a little chart and say this is how many were correct and how many were wrong, and you could actually drill down and go see where it is, and that kind of disappeared. So there is a tab here that says run all test scenarios, and it, yeah, there you go, something happened. But it only gave me this one error. It doesn't show me where it came from. I have to go dig down and find it. And then if I solve this one, there might be another one behind it. So hopefully 6.1 will have that cleared up. But yeah, so that's how I modeled a validation system. So to see how this would kind of run from a code perspective, and this might be nice and tiny. Let's see. Before I get into this, I have to say, yeah, one more thing here. So, so out of the box, if we create, as I said, when we create this knowledge session, it's going to wrap it up into a jar file, and it's going to have a special file in it called the kmodule.xml, and that kind of defines what rules you have there, what package they're in, and how you get a hold of them. If on your class path you only have one of those, all you have to do is say, hey, give me a rule session, and it's going to know that you're talking about this group. But right here, so I've split off and I have 2 sets of rules. I have one that does validation, I have one that does scoring, which we'll look at in a second. But because I have both of those on the class path of my application, I've got to separate those somehow. You know, as if you deploy them on the class path, it'll say, hey, I found more than one rules base, and I'm going to ignore them all unless you tell me specifically which one you have that you're interested in. And in order to name them, we go here to these project settings, and you'll see. And here's a couple quirks, and I'll definitely have these in the write-up or what have you. So I want to give this a particular name, validation base. So when I get to my code, I only want to run the rules that are about validation. So I give it a special name, and I tell it, here's the package that I'm interested in. If you notice, just like Java code, if I look at these rules that I'm creating, it does have a package. And so that's what this is referring to. So I look at this project. So I give this special validation base, I give it a name, and I tell it it's not default, and I want it to use this particular package. But what this does is this kind of breaks the BRMS from working. In order, if you want the BRMS to work, you also have to have a default KBase that is set at default, and that has a knowledge session that is set at default, and that is stateful. You need all of these things, or like it just stops working. I will definitely get that on in the write-up.
Why'd you break them up into 2 knowledge bases?
Well, the idea was that if this was, and I know that I'm not making like a real system, but I wanted to make this kind of realistic. And so if the scoring system is going to have a ton of data into it, and it's going to get really full up, and I'm going to keep this in memory all the time. Like I'm going to fill it with all of the players and all the statistics and all of everything, and it's going to be trickling in stats. And every once in a while, I'm going to pull it and say, okay, well, what's the cumulative score now? Because that's what you're going to push out to the players. I want to see my score increase in real time. Whereas a validation is kind of a batch approach. Like, okay, so right before the week starts, we're going to validate, we're going to validate everything, make sure that everything's right as far as moving things around. Because then once the week starts, then it stops. That is kind of contrived, but those are kind of the two main use cases of rules that I've seen. So I kind of wanted to kind of cover both of those grounds. Yeah, it's like big, all at once kind of thing, and then like kind of a as you go kind of dynamic solution. So, and just makes things harder, which is fun, I guess. Let's see. Oh yeah, so the code to take a look at how we're going to call this. All right. This is and anybody have the shortcut to increase the font size real quick? What's that?
Preferences,
General appearance font. Yeah. Some text editor.
General Java editor.
colors and fonts.
All right.
Okay, so if you go to preferences, appearance under general,
Right.
and then colors and fonts, and then under at the bottom.
There's the Java, or just do text.
UN, yeah. Click on the last one.
Yes.
Yeah. Click on the terminal console. So should click on it.
I didn't do it. Anyway, all right. Sorry, guys. So in order to, I can just talk through this. So
I got it. Sorry. Basic. Colors and fonts. And then basic. Text. Edit.
Top right,
Top right. Bottom. Yeah.
okay. All right. So we're gonna fire the rules. So first we got to get a hold of the session. Let's do that first. So this is we're going to just get an instance of the KIE services. Knowledge KIE stands for knowledge is everything. That was the tagline there, and then we get out of that we're going to get a container. I'm doing something called an agenda listener and a rule listener. At debug time, we can put these listeners into my knowledge session and listen to certain events. Whenever a fact is created, whenever a fact is retracted or modified or that sort of thing, then we can either do something. You can use it to do something. Typically, it's used just as debugging to try to get an idea of how things are kind of firing off in the rule system. Once you dump the facts in there, you usually don't have a whole lot of control over what happens. So that's what's going on there. I was messing with that because it broke. And so then when I want to fire off a bunch of rules, so I come in here and then here's that validation base that we talked about that matches that name that I gave it inside of the BRMS. And I'm going to say give me this base and go create a new session out of it. The session is where we're actually going to do the work. Here I'm adding these listeners so I can see what's going on. And then I take all my POJOs out of the database and I'm just dumping them in here, looping through and dumping them into the knowledge session. And then when I'm ready, I fire off all the rules. And so everything's completely done. And then I can do something like this. So I'm going to do if facts on this filter violation class. So those violations, I didn't put those in there beforehand. It created those when, on the fly, and then I can say, give me everything that matches this particular class name. And so if I run through this, actually, I created, so I have a test unit class that actually goes and creates a league, and it just fills it all up with like 10, 15 players. And I can run a unit test that hits that. So if I test this demo league, we'll see the output of validation results. So all of this kind of garbage here, so you can see that these object inserted. So here's that's a listener that I was talking about. So as I was looking through and dumping these things in here, saying, oh, I found a fact object, and I'm just letting you know that something happened, and then I fire off all the rules, and we actually found, out of just randomly picking players for these 12 fake teams, I did find a violation severity warning that an active player is out or on injured reserve, and you have them in an active slot, or you also have an active player that's questionable or doubtful. And I created an information warning. So there's that. So what's a little more interesting than that, let's take a look at the scoring system. The code to actually interact with the scoring system is pretty much the same. As I said, there's only one entity that it's interested in, and that's a play statistic. So that's something happened. A player got 25 receiving yards, a player got a touchdown, a player threw a touchdown, a player fumbled the ball, there were 2 points allowed or whatever against the defense, all of these sorts of things. So the scoring system looks more like this. I've got a little syntactic, using a little sugar here to allow this to be a real-time system. But so when this starts off, the rule engine is just completely empty, and then I'm eventually going to throw in a play statistic. Well, I want to be able to accumulate that statistic. This particular player got 25 yards. Well, he might have already had 15 yards, and I want to. What's a better example? A player defense. So a player defense, somebody has scored 2 points on the defense, and the score against that is you get 7 points for your defense if they hold the other team to 2 points. Then if they get another touchdown on that person, then it gets them to another scoring bracket. Better to take a look at this decision table first, like a points allowed table. So these rules model kind of the Yahoo Fantasy football. It basically says if your defense does a shutout, then you get 10 points. If they allow 1 to 6 points, then they get 7, and on the way on down. And then if they up down to they allow 35 plus points, you get -4 points. Well, the problem with that is if these rules are streaming in as they're coming, so points allowed were 2 and points allowed were 7. I can't calculate those by themselves. I have to accumulate them first. Right? I have to add all of those things together. So that's what all of this. That's what all of this kind of DRL magic here is doing. So what it does is when a new statistic comes in, it goes and finds any. It has these accumulate rules that kind of go in and erase any weekly roll-ups, either scores or statistics, and gets rid of them. and then goes and recreates them so that these rules can fire again. And again, just like a guided rule, if we look at here, this really each row of a decision table spits out a separate rule. And you can see essentially these are matching on a particular statistic type. This is looking on this player weekly statistic, which is a roll-up of those facts that are streaming into the system. So these don't exist. It creates them, it matches on them, and then it inserts a score, which is then accumulated into an accumulated score. So, like I said, when a new statistic comes in, it's going to rip those back out and go through all of this again. All of this complexity is for this kind of situation where I want to have an individual long passing play, a passing play that has over 25 yards. I have to evaluate that one by itself. Otherwise, you could just accumulate them and then just and add them and evaluate them. So this has got to do both. So this is also another example of this particular rule is an example of two things. This is a better example of using the DSL, right? So I created a DSL for these long-running plays where, say, if you have allowed the person to select the type of play and select a threshold, then you can go and dump in a score. And so that's what this does. What it's also showing is how to use inheritance. So I created this default scoring system as active. And this default scoring system basically says the rule set ID is null. So the idea here would be that I could not only have leagues that are in the same sport that have different scoring systems, but this obviously, if you had football and baseball, they would have completely different scoring systems. So you'll see the default cumulative scores. This is what's rolling up the scores, and this is an exact copy of like the Yahoo playing the Yahoo scores that for each of these types of actions, these statistic types. For every one, you're going to get X points. So for a passing touchdown, for every passing touchdown, you'll get 4 points. For every 25 passing yards, you'll get 1 point. And so, as is usual with these BRMS type systems, like the developer will kind of set up these kind of intricate things, and then just get the knobs and switches for the analyst to tweak. So, for instance, if somebody wanted a league that had a slightly different scoring system, they could just completely copy this table and just say, I'm going to say rule set ID 1, and then change the way that they calculate their scores.
They can actually also import Excel sheet and populate this data.
Not this particular one, but you can. There is a guided rule table that you can actually use spreadsheets, like you said. And then similarly, I've got a table for calculating scores for field goals. So this is the difference between this and the other score is like this is kind of like that long passing play. These are passing in how many yards they're for. So these are evaluated just one at a time, as opposed to all added together. And so the rest, just rounding this out, then of course I have, for instance, the points allowed this is kind of the this shows how you can accumulate the score. If I drop in this defense allowed 2 points, I expect it to have, according to the table, 2 points. I expect them to have 7. And and as I keep it, so what you can do in these test scenarios is continually add things. So you're going to add something firewall rules, and you can add something else in fire rules again, and these can actually go on for a while. So this has like 3 different rule sets here, or 3 different invocations of the rule system. So I dumped in, these guys got scored against 2 points, and then another 5 points came in, so then that should bump up their score to 7, and then they got scored against some more, and then that should dump them down to 4. So we can run this, and yeah. So we'll actually see, I have these listeners here that are going through. These are all of the technical rules that are doing the windups, doing the roll-ups. So the first time I dumped it in, it accumulated dumped it in once, and it accumulated that 2 points were against it. So it rolled up the statistic, rolled up the score, and then it calculated the thing, and then I put in some more scores against it, and you see it started retracting them all and reaccumulating them to get them back to the new totals. And then on the third part, we dumped in some more statistics, and then retracted them. Okay. So that is the approach that we took for the rules. Obviously, with business, the BPM, not ready for that. Eventually, what this will be is we have an awesome graphic designer, and she made this really cool, pretty website that doesn't work yet. But what the demonstration will be, we'll have all of this cool stuff, and you'll be able to go move your players around, and you'll be able to simulate. You'll say, okay, and I'm on week 2. Go calculate scores, and then kind of move the clock around. So it'll be nice and fun. And like I said, so we should probably have that the list of the blog posts that will go through the design and how to get the code and run it locally and or in a OpenShift or what have you shortly. Okay.
How much compute does it actually take? You just run a meeting that was obviously designed with one thing, but then execute. And how minimal of an environment can you provide?
I have to say, this computer wasn't even breaking a sweat on it. It's a lot of teeny little facts, and it's really good at putting them all in order. So it really, you have a RAM, you have a memory constraint because I'm reading like all that little database. And dumping it into the rules, but it does, as you saw, we did a validation. It ran very quickly. I can run the scores. It runs in a couple seconds. And this is actually, and I'll put a link to this guy. This guy is really cool. He was an ex-fighter pilot, and then he became a statistician, and he likes fantasy football, and he's got a website that has every play-by-play for the last 10 years.
Fighter can stat this.
And I guess you got to be precise either way. But he has a website, and you can get every single play-by-play for the last 10 years. And so I carved off 2013, and that's what so I've got every single play from 2013 in here, and every single player, and every weekly status of injured reserve, and it's a decent amount. It's a decent amount of data, and you can dump it in there, and it cranks through it pretty quick. I mean, it's pretty efficient at doing this kind of things, and especially with the scoring, you can see it's like fighting itself constantly. That's kind of a contrived situation. Usually when they're trickling in, it's really only resetting as a statistic comes in, it's only resetting the ones that it affects, which would be a pretty small footprint actually.
What are the inputs look like? What do the files look like? And are they dumped into a queue? How are they accumulated?
So right now I've got everything in a database, but what I did was I created this parser that takes the actual, because it comes in a stream. It comes in these bizarre format, and apparently that's just no. It's a CSV, but it's got a really. Let me see if I can get an example.
I'm knocking you off your demonstration.
Oh no! I mean, I'm pretty much done. So
I was going there anyway. So I was going to ask him that actually.
So yeah, because what I would eventually like to do is the NFL. There's no place. Outside of ex-fighter pilots, there's no way to go out for free and get NFL data. I actually spent an inordinate amount of time getting the data together, and I didn't get it all from one. Got it from 20 different places. There are places that have that, but they want to sell it to you for $1,000. The NFL puts out all of its data, but they only put out the live stream as it's happening. and that's what this guy did. He just put a crawler out there and he just like sucked it down, which is kind of cool. Let's see what. I got all nerdy and made a lecture. Should have just written the rules, but let's see, where it is.
So you put all CSV data in a database. Is that what you did?
Pretty much, yeah. Because it came from all of the interwebs. I'm sure I violated many things. Let's see here. Here's a single. So this is what a game. This is what a game looks like. So this is so this is what it streams in as. So it's got this.
Oh, I saw that.
Yeah, it was good. But you'll see what makes it really hard is that these can like string out to be like 4 or 5 different things, and like the fourth action might negate the one before it. So obviously the lecture that I have is not 100% accurate, but it does. All this.
How'd you get this into your database? By SQL?
Well, I mean Hibernate. So I have a lecture that goes through and it like sucks in a line and then it like breaks it into the little pojas that I have, or the little entities that I have.
Gotcha.
Gotcha. So you can have like Peterson runs for 15 and then there's a penalty.
Right. So you have to look and see was there no gain or a penalty was declined, or fumbles are like a nightmare. Because so I do have it. I'll put the code out there. It's not my best, but you can definitely see where it like chunks through a line, and you have to keep track of who's on the offense. And then say, oh well, this particular action switches the offense and the defense, so you can make sure to credit the scores in the right way. Or you'll get to a particular line, then you have to backtrack and get rid of this stuff.
You do this in your spare time?
Yeah, when you're. What I say?
Wow.
So this was, what's really sad is, this obviously this is not as polished as I wanted it to be during this presentation. But it's almost done, and what I want to do next is there's actually some JavaScript rules engines and JavaScript process engines, and do a JavaScript version. See if my wife kills me before I do that. I'd have to take a break for a while.
You can put a game visualization on the front of this, actually, that actually goes to the rules and generates a graphical view of the game. Not actually generate players and actions and so on. So,
well, the fantasy football apps, most of the one that I use, ESPN, it actually does that. It shows you, and it just has like a helmet for each team. It'll say like what yard line they're on, and then last play was. So
and you know what? It's probably coming up to the stream.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure it is.
Only their lecture probably works better.
Imagine 4 sons of bitches that have to type this in while the game's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then at the end they go back and sometimes they have to change things like, oh, this was a half tackle, not a full tackle, because I've lost a game that way.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. The next day, all of a sudden the scores change just a little bit. Yeah. Wow. So that's basically it. And so, like I said, so what's coming up next is definitely getting, finishing up the web app and then showing how you could like orchestrate the BPM stuff. Is definitely next on the list. And then looking into the Optiplanner to try to see how to like make the ultimate team, or give you suggestions that you should consider doing this, that sort of thing.
There's an obvious need to separate the business logic from the software, and this kind of stuff does it. But your rules are pretty sophisticated. You almost have to have an analyst full time to understand all the business logic that would be in a system like this.
Well, yes and no, and I think what
this one was non-trivial, really.
I think as an engineer, I made it more complicated than it had to be. But what I wanted to, when I get to this point, really, an analyst. If I was pitching this to an analyst, these are the 3 screens that I would show. Right, I would say here's your scoring system, because you can go to the yahoo.com and say here's your scoring system, and this matches. Oh yeah, word for word, and then I could say in a couple clicks you could make a complete copy of this table and create your own scoring system. Because of all of I think one of the misnomers about the rules system is that it's the analyst, you're just going to hand it to your analyst and they're just going to run with it. And it's like you got to set it up to get them to that point and set them up, like I said, get the levers and the knobs where they want it, and then they're happy. So maybe I should start from this, present this stuff, look how cool this is, and then start peeling back the layers, because it is overly complicated, but at the same time, this is probably what a real fantasy football system kind of start. These are the things that you have to deal with: the different rule sets, the different. Really, I'm sure most of those engines handle multiple sports. Handle lots of different things.
But I think it's like what you said in the beginning. BRMS forces you to go think about it a certain way. You can just imagine how this would look in if-else code. You would write it once, and then you would say,
and somebody would say,
whoever's going to take it over from me or whatever.
Yeah, somebody would say, now give me a different, give me a slightly different scoring system.
I think the example he used initially, where they sat all the people down and they said, "Here's our rule set that we're using in their business," and 99% of them said, "No, it's not."
Yeah, that was all.
That would be powerful right there.
But yeah, usually that's what it just
They
brings it
don't
out
know
there.
what their business rules are.
Because here, even though it's got multiple files or rules defined on the side, you can go and look at each one of them separately.
Yeah.
And you can see how they interact with one another, where if it's just code, it's very difficult. I think maintainability, it just makes it easier to maintain. Where if you have to zoom in, you can't take in consideration 5 or 10 other rules before or after it, which means you get to a point where I don't know if this is going to fix it or not.
I'm struggling with this. You kick it off because you're reading a database of all those events.
Well, right, yeah. So I'm simulating this kind of thing.
If you're going to do this real time, the event would come in every.
Yeah, so they're going to trickle in, right? So I'm going to you would say every 20 seconds. Yeah, I'm going to pile them up every 20 seconds, and I'm going to dump them in fire all rules. And then how I accounted for that was, so what happens here? So the scoring, what the scoring system is doing is it's creating these roll-ups, these weekly score and weekly statistics, and I put a timestamp on them. So a new statistic comes in and says, I'm going to affect these, so it rips those out, and then it goes and retracts them, recalculates them. Then from the Java side, what I have a query where I can pass in a date. Let's see here. In these weekly queries. So a query is just like a rule, but it doesn't have a then. So you can say, give me a match all of these things. And from the Java side, we can pass in a date. And I say, give me all the statistics from this date. And so it just gives me the stuff that's changed since the last time I checked it.
So how do you accumulate it? You say you accumulated the Bojos inside the rule engine, or where does it get accumulated?
Well, so right now, I mean, obviously, I'm working with 2013 data.
Yeah.
So I've got all of the rules. So I've got a pointer. In the code, I would say, okay, we're simulating that this particular league is on week 2.
Yeah.
And I'll say, okay, give me the first game, give me the first X amount of plays.
Yeah.
You can order them by game time or whatever, and you say dump 1,000 plays in, and then. So I've just got I'm keeping track of that in the database, pulling them out. So if this was real time, they would be trickling in, and you'd hold them up in the Java code, and then you dump them into the rule engine. Fire all rules.
So you keep them in Java code, and then you dump them all.
Or in a cat, like a data grid, or you'd be storing them you'd probably passivate it at some point, so then you could sell the data set for $2,000, I guess.
So you can increase that window to say do a week or maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
In this system, I mean, yes. In the demo system, yeah, you'd say do the whole season.
Okay.
Could you correlate this or think historical weather added to the facts of the events of the game that occurred at the time, and then begin to project the effect on weather on future games? I mean,
obviously it's taking external potential influences on the players.
Yeah,
It seems like that just becomes an extension of the rules, just because of additional rules.
I mean, yeah, football statistics is it has many rabbit holes to jump down. So, I mean, I definitely have, like on the players, just so happened the place where I got all the player statistics, it's got their height and their weight and how many years they've got in. I was like, well, you could correlate, start to see performance based on those types of things. I mean, yeah, you could run off in many different directions, but.
Would you bet on it in the future? Would you bet on give an outcome in the future based on the?
Might as well just start with the conclusion and figure out how you want to work it out.
Well, there you go. Yeah, you could do that.
Right.
But I would definitely say I would not want to ever release this type of software after seeing what Yahoo went through. Oh my God! Their fantasy football just tanked on Sunday, and there were millions of people. They had the pitchforks out. They were upset.
I mean, film software.
Yeah, and they, so for I guess Isaac, yours got messed up, right? But I mean, eventually, I guess they worked through it. But, yeah, people take that stuff very seriously.
Well, it's more annoying because you do it after spending, because we had a live draft, you spend an hour on a live draft for them to finish it. All you're still on.
And then I hope it comes back.
I don't read 3 papers.
Well, that's another point on this: checkpointing and validation and auditing and so on. So if you were using rules in a commercial environment,
Yeah.
you would have to audit. Someone wanted to go back and say, why did we end up in this state?
Absolutely.
Applying this to the
Absolutely, and so there, it is kind of nice that because when they switch to the Maven stuff, that you can you keep track of the stuff. You give it a you give it a GAV, you give it a group artifact version, and so you could bump that along with the version with your application. I mean, although you can have this dynamically, your application will just go get the latest version of the rules from the rule system. You rarely see that in production. Usually in production they want to tag and bag it and have that part of the deployment, just so you have that kind of accountability. It makes sense. But what's nice here is, so if in a real system you are going to have analysts are going to be making some changes, and you're going to have developers are going to be making some changes, and neither one of them are really going to trust each other. So it's or at least not 100%. But so there are test scenarios in here. So if I was an analyst, I would come in and there were some changes, I would definitely run through all the tests and say, you see, I had a red bar there, so I messed something up. But on the other hand, we typically do it on the other side as well. We have unit tests for all. The stuff we were looking through was the result of the unit test. So I would definitely test it on kind of both sides. And
No excuse for not testing.
exactly. And that actually happened here, right before the lead validation thing. When I finally got the unit test working, and it ran through an actual league full of data. I found that there were a couple bugs that I missed in the test scenario. So definitely good to have it there.
So in a real life scenario, you have multiple applications, you have this engine running, and let's say you have one application that's just feeding it plays, events that happen.
Right.
Another application that says, give me Rick's team score right now. So it interact with the engine through API.
So you can do that. What I would envision for this kind of scoring system would be, you might use a SOA approach to it or whatever. So you would definitely have a listener. It's got I don't know if these are FTP or if these are SOA or whatever, but these are trickling in. It's going to transform it and line it up, and every once in a while it's going to dump them into the rule engine. Probably going to save that to some kind of data store.
Okay.
And then have something else that's kind of pushing it out. One of our other plans for this demo is we're looking at this thing called Live Oak, or for the JavaScript side, Loopback. But these are mobile platforms that you'd have a little mobile app, and you kind of register as a listener and say, whenever this thing changes, I want you to push it down, and you kind of use WebSockets or whatever. So we're hoping to get this to the point where it would do that. You could run through, the next demo, everyone would have it on the phone, and run through the scores, and then you see pop up with the update.
Yeah. Okay.
But that's I don't know. That's just how I was working to my idea. I don't know.
I'm looking for customers and how do you use this, and I understand extracting all the rules from the code, but those applications still need to exist. You're just using the rules in a centralized area so the analyst can validate them, make sure they're right.
Right.
If there's existing code that actually has to.
Or they can look at it. Right. Well, I mean, I guess the idea would be like every year. I mean, this is probably going to change. Like if this were a real system or whatever, so the default. The cumulative rules, the analysts are probably going to come together and they're going to hem and haw about okay, well, last year it wasn't fair to give 6 points for this, so this year it should be 5.
Right.
And so that they can actually go and make those tests, or they can make those changes and make a copy of this and change the year to 2014 or 2015 or whatever. And then they can write their test scenarios and they can say, okay, yeah, this is good. As opposed to, just writing out some requirements and hoping that it worked the way that
None of the apps change. It's just
right, yeah, it's just chewing through the facts.
Yeah, just redeploy the jar file. How does the BPM get hold of this DRL? Is there a jar file and it reads it in? What's the connection between BRMS and BPM? How do they interact?
Well, I mean, so you had like a business process that has like a rules sync or whatever.
Yeah,
That's like, so now I get to this point and I want you to fire off these kind of rules. It kind of definitely. It would have a dependency on that jar, basically, and because at the end of the day, really, you would still build, you would create this kind of this is like a set of rules, what have you, and I'm giving it a particular name, and so I'm going to build and deploy it, and when I create that business process, that's just going to be one of its dependencies.
Yeah, but that jar file is going to put it in your engine.
Well, it's going to be accessible by it, right? I mean, because your BPM engine, this is your BPM engine, really, right?
So it's the difference between having the rules embedded inside your application or going to an external server.
See, that's what I was saying. How are you doing that? You're just going to embed the jar file inside your BPM engine? That's what you're going to do?
Yeah. Okay.
So just from the perspective of one general question I've had for some time is that could you take what traditional software and rather than having it be in linear type fashion, could you most software as rules? But an expert, somebody who really knew rules, pick any application that you've had coded in the past, traditionally. Could you do it in rules instead?
I mean, you probably could do anything.
Would you?
Would you want to?
That's what I'm asking.
I think you're very if the order of operation is very important. So you can see. So let me put it this way. So most of the time, like a rules is doing some kind of like validation, those types of things. So you notice, like, I wanted to kind of build this. I wanted it to be real time, and I wanted to do all this retraction, and like I had to do a lot of work to get it to happen. I'm using salience. I'm using all of these things. I'm fighting the rule engine, really. I think this is probably about as close to the edge as I would go in this direction. And this is a code smell saying that, well, maybe you're doing it the wrong way. I mean, I could have obviously, I had thought about this many times, and I was like, well, I could just like wipe it out and just every time I'm about to run it from the Java code would go in and wipe it out, and then reload some of the facts and do all of this. I was trying to be slick and get this to go, and I don't know if this would be the best way to do it. I would have to keep an eye on this.
But in a control system, it's only the example I always think of is UAVs and drones or autonomous aircraft specific, and that is what I've seen in the past with traditional coding. It's been very much rigorous coding and a whole bunch of it.
Yeah.
And yet, if you think of a control system, rules are exactly that, a real-time control system. So it makes me think that this would be a very formidable type thing. And I saw someone in the past use a rules engine to do an autopilot that was relatively simplistic. But it was clear that it was a really good way to do it, actually. That it could take people that could express how to fly an aircraft in different situations, weather conditions, and a variety of other situations. That all those facts could be expressed as facts that could become as put to rules.
I guess you could if you put it in a jar file. Set a jar file for your rules.
Well, it's just the modeling of, I guess, the modeling of the system, reactions to it.
And I think really it's when you take the rules and you mix it with the business processes, right? I mean, because the business process is really a state machine, and so from that point, you can do some really powerful. So, get right away.
Backpack check.
Yep. Cool. Well, I appreciate you guys'
Thank you
patience.
so much. I know that's a lot of work.
And,
It's actually very funny because at my job, I was thinking about doing this, and I was like, oh god, it's such a hill to climb.
it's, yeah, it is.
All the people that I work with are really interested. It gives them context.
Yeah.
So
I'm definitely, I mean,
once
this,
it's on GitHub, I'm going to steal it.
absolutely. That's what it's there for. So once on GitHub, you can steal it and you can add some stuff to it too.
Let's say contribute to it.
There you go.
You could have done the accent voice.
I know. I know. I'm an engineer. I can't help it. I really tried. But yeah, so I really appreciate you guys
Do you have
coming
a
out.
card?
Yeah, I do. Absolutely.
All right, I guess we're done for the night then, and this will be up on YouTube if you're not looking at it that way. We'll also link to it in Meetup. So we'll see you at the next Meetup.